truly, truly, truly makes you question every single ingredient and everything that you've ever put inside your body. It'll make you lose your faith in humanity and then regain it all within the same chapter. One that's gonna make a lot of people feel really uncomfortable. If I look crazy, it's because I overdid my makeup because the light always washes me out. So hopefully I don't look like a clown in this video. I just realized I haven't made myself a coffee. It's only 17 books. I think I'll be fine. What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today is a very exciting one because it is my 2023 wrapped favorite books of the year type of video. So today we have 5 categories that I have narrowed it down to. First category will be memoirs. The second category will be just like general nonfiction. The third category is poetry. The fourth category is fiction. And then the fifth category is going to be manga. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Our first category is memoirs. I actually ended up reading only memoirs from female authors, like female writers, not intentionally. That's just kind of the way the cookie crumbled this year in terms of memoirs. So I have 3 really amazing ones to tell you about. The first one is Poet Warrior. This is Joy Harjo's second memoir. Reviews called this one a kaleidoscopic sequel to or follow-up to Crazy Brave, and it definitely focuses more on like family and just the things that she does in her daily life to kind of keep rooted in nature and spiritual things that she does just to kind of like keep herself centered, I guess. A lot about ancestors, a lot about family, a lot about poetry, of course. She is the Poet Laureate of the United States, or not currently, but she was like 2 or 3 times running, I think. And I'm not sure that that's ever happened before, but that's really incredible. She absolutely deserves that accolade. So there's a lot in here about like grieving the passing of her mother, a lot about just America and stolen land, like America being like a stolen country. Lots about all the different rituals and kind of things that she performs and stomp dances and all of that. So if you are looking for a good Native American read, a voice from like the Native American world, she is incredibly prolific, and I actually will have a whole video once I complete her oeuvre. I will have a video all about her. So I'm very excited for that. Next up is one that I actually mentioned in my 2023 favorites. I only mentioned a few books in that video, but I have to mention it again, and that is In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is one of the most intense memoirs that you will probably ever read. Major trigger warnings, content warnings. Definitely look at those on Storygraph. They have a really great way to kind of scroll to the bottom of any book's page and look and see what people have written about like the type of content that's in the book. Yeonmi Park is a North Korean defector, meaning she grew up, she was raised in North Korea, escaped with her mom when she was 13. The people, unfortunately, that were supposed to help her along the way were not so trustworthy. And long story short, her and her mother were sold into the sex trade. So that is the big trigger warning for this one. I don't understand how one person can be so resilient, to be totally honest. It just like boggles my mind. It's probably the most important memoir that you will ever read, that I've ever read. It'll make you lose your faith in humanity and then regain it all within the same chapter. It's incredible. Definitely check the trigger warnings, but this one will absolutely knock your socks off. So 5 stars for this one. Then something that is a complete 180 and is super lighthearted, and for those of you who don't want to read something that is so intense, this is What I Was Doing While You Were Breeding by Kristen Newman. She is a writer for television, and so the way it works, I guess, is you get a couple of months off after you've been like on a long writing stint, and so she would always save up to go on vacation, usually to somewhere in like Europe or Greece, somewhere like that, and she would always have flings while she was there, which she called vacation ships. So this is very much a novel of just like kind of her bed hopping through the, like different islands and different countries in Europe, and I found it absolutely fascinating. She kind of takes the traditional ideal that women should be, or the things that we should want. You know, we should want to settle down, we should want marriage, and we should want babies and all of that. And she just turns that upside down and enjoys every second of doing it. So I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This is definitely a good like armchair escape, armchair travel type of read, especially for the winter months. So if you are experiencing a little bit of seasonal depression, I highly recommend picking this one up because it was so much fun. And I loved it. And I'm not a big rereader, but I can kind of see myself rereading this one day. Now moving on to nonfiction. So I found that these books in particular just did something to my brain that made me think a little bit differently about life. Let's jump right into the first one, which is about money. Money and the Law of Attraction by Jerry and Esther Hicks. This is part of the Teaching of Abraham's book series. There's a whole bunch of these I've read. I think all of them at this point. There may be one or two that have escaped me, but yes, this one is incredible. So this is not a book that's giving you tips on how to invest and where to put your money. It's not like that. It's not a practical step-by-step do this with your income kind of book. It is all about your mindset. It's all about how you think about money, and obviously how it relates to the law of assumption or the law of attraction, however you want to call it. I actually have a couple of videos on my channel about the law of attraction and how I feel like I've used it in the past, even though I'm totally a novice and have no idea what I'm doing. There's a couple of things that have happened in my life that I feel like I was employing this, whether or not I realized it. So the subtitle is Learning to Attract Wealth, Health, and Happiness. So it is more than just about actual money, and it's not one of those books that's just saying speak it, believe it, receive it, where it's just feel that you are a millionaire and then it'll just show up in your bank account. It's not that kind of book. It's all about changing your vibration around money, the energy, the things that you say. Something that I notice that I personally do around money is when something is more than what I think it should be, when something costs more than I think it should, I'm always oh, that's so expensive. And I scoff at it. I say, oh, it's too expensive. It's too expensive. I've kind of stopped doing that, or I've been able to catch myself when I do that, and I try to turn it into something different. Instead of, oh, it's so expensive, it's, oh, that's more than I would want to pay, or, oh, okay, that's how much that costs. Little things like that I think can really help you change the way that you feel about money. So if you are somebody who grew up hearing things like, oh, money doesn't grow on trees, and this idea of scarcity around money, highly recommend something like this. I get it, the law of attraction stuff is really out there and woo-woo for a lot of people. So you will have to go into it with an open mind, but I cannot recommend these books enough. I love them, I love them, I love them. Next up is very different. This one is all about nature and indigenous wisdom and science and what nature can teach us, and that is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This was so good. This was one of my top reads for sure. I think this maybe would have to be in my top 3 if I were to make a top 3 books video. This is just extraordinary. It's basically the author's experience as a biologist, what she's able to see in the world, and her science knowledge, and she kind of marries that with her indigenous wisdom as well, because she is a part of, I forget what tribe that she is a member of, Potawatomi tribe. It's a lot about her being a mother, about her being a scientist, about her being a member of a tribe, a native tribe. Just the way that she sees the world is incredible. Like I said, these books are the ones that kind of helped change my worldview a little bit. So the main takeaway from this one was the idea of reciprocity, which she talks about a lot. We take so much, so many resources from the earth, and most people, we feel really disconnected from them. We don't really see, as she'll say, you don't really see the tree in the tissue. You grab for a tissue and you blow your nose and you throw it away, and you don't stop for 1 second to think about how that tissue is made and the insane amount of time and energy and people that went into the process of making this little tissue. So the idea of reciprocity is just thinking about those types of things and figuring out how, in what way could we possibly give back. It's phenomenal. I've literally never heard anybody give this a bad review. Next is one I think that I donated because I knew it wasn't going to be a reread, but it was still excellent. Obviously, it's making it to this video, and that is The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan. Is that right? This was excellent. So this is another one that just completely makes you question everything, particularly around food. So the idea is that he wanted to create a meal for his family and his friends that was entirely created by his own hands. That means if he wanted meat at the meal, he would need to go out and hunt something and kill it and butcher it. If he wanted vegetables on the table, he needed to grow them himself, plant them and grow them himself. We get to see the process of him going out and learning about those things. I will say it was a little dry at first. I'm not kidding when I say he spends the first 100 pages talking about corn. So be prepared for an insanely in-depth look at our agricultural system. It truly, truly, truly makes you question every single ingredient and everything that you've ever put inside your body. So if you are into like health, food, you know, gastronomy, anything at all like that, I think you will find this one really interesting. It definitely makes you, like when you go into a grocery store the first time after finishing that book, you will have a different experience than you've ever had at the grocery store. So I thought it was excellent and I do recommend that one. Next up was an audiobook that I just finished like a couple of weeks ago. Empire of the Summer Moon is about the Comanche tribe. It's all about particularly Quanah Parker, who was sort of not the chief because they didn't really have chiefs, but one of their main leaders. All about his life. It was really fascinating. His wife, the story of his wife was almost more fascinating than him. She was a white woman, a young child. She was like 8 or 9 when she was kidnapped by the Comanches, raised by the Comanches, married Quanah Parker. She had a daughter named Prairie Flower and lived her life as a Comanche, and then was eventually stolen back by, I don't know if it was her family or just a man who wanted to marry her, but she was stole back by the whites later on in life. She did not want to go back. Her story is incredible. It's really insane. And there's actually a film coming out, I believe in 2024. I think it's in pre-production right now. I don't know who's going to be in it. I don't know who's directing, but I'm very excited. I feel like we need more movies like that. Like we truly, truly need more Native American stories. But I loved this. I listened to it on audiobook. I thought the narrator did a really good job. It's just one of those stories that you don't really hear about. Really, it was really interesting how he was able to not assimilate, but how he was able to communicate very well with whites at the time, like the people who were coming in to steal their land. I think we have this idea in our head, or at least I do, maybe perpetuated by like Disney movies and that kind of thing, that you think of Native Americans as being very peaceful. They just set up their teepees and they hunt their buffalo and they sow their seeds and they harvest their crops. That's a very cliched image of who Native Americans were, and this book, again, changed my worldview on that, because the Comanches in particular, not every tribe, some tribes were peaceful, they were a warrior tribe. There was a lot of bloodshed caused by intertribal warfare well before the white man showed up. I'm just at the very, very beginning of learning about all sorts of different Native American tribes. It's sort of not a resolution, but it's definitely a goal of mine, is to start reading more Native American stories. So this one was just one of the many that I hope to read in the future. And then lastly, for nonfiction, we have a Mary Oliver. She is one of my new faves. This is Upstream. This is essays. So she's mainly known, I feel like, for her poetry, but these were some really beautiful essays. There's just something about the way that she writes and the way that she has this very spiritual way of talking about nature in her prose that is just so hypnotizing. I've never heard anybody give her a bad review ever. And she talks a little bit about her like literary inspiration and just the way that she writes of nature, kind of like a friend that she admires, if that makes any sense. I was obsessed with this. I was completely hypnotized. She's got a really beautifully poignant story in here about attempting to nurse an injured baby gull, like seagull, back to life, that nearly brought me to tears at the end. I highly recommend all of her stuff. It doesn't even have to be this one. Next time you're in the bookstore, if you see her name, it doesn't even have to be this particular book. Just grab it and buy it and do yourself a favor. All right, our next category is poetry. So these are poems that I feel like are going to force you to feel the beauty and see the beauty in tragedy, and maybe the other way around as well. These were really intense, really emotional. I'm not a big poetry reader, to be completely honest. I'm mostly reading fiction and then, a sprinkling of nonfiction every now and then. But these in particular they were definitely some of the more emotional books that I read this year. First up is another Joy Harjo. And this is actually a book of poetry, which is the thing that she's known the most for, is her poetry. This is Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings. And she has a million different poetry collections. They're all really good. It's so hard to capture, to explain in words, like how poems like this make you feel. I always leave her books feeling like, I need to get more out in nature. I need to get more serious about like having some sort of spiritual or religious practice that I do. I just leave her books feeling really refreshed. Her poetry is just like a glass of cold water when you've been walking in the desert for hours or something. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think Robin Wall Kimmerer gets really, really close. I would say they're kind of in the same vein, but yes, I just can't recommend her stuff enough, so I will give you guys a few examples so that you kind of get the vibes for these. Then next up is The Goodbye World poem by Brian Turner. I had the lovely opportunity to meet him when I was at my writing workshop in October of this year down in Quartz Mountain, which was a beautiful, beautiful location surrounded by beautiful people and beautiful poetry. This one mainly focuses on grief. So again, kind of trigger warning, not the happiest set of poems because his wife passed away. And I think you find that out super early on. I think it's in like the first poem. The Crossing in particular, that is the first poem in here, and oh my goodness, I almost cried right off the bat. I feel like he started out with his best. He gave us a banger right off the start. I mean, they were all really good, honestly, after that. There's one in here called Falling Giants about a whale fall. So like the death of a whale. I feel like that's just really important sometimes, because in death and in somebody's writing about grieving, a lot of times you get the most beautiful lines as well. I don't know. There's something about these that just, it gets you right in the feels. So I really liked this one. And then another Mary Oliver. So this is Dreamwork. This is another Pulitzer Prize winning book of poems. Just the way that she writes about nature, I cannot get over it. She really does write about nature like a friend, or like almost like it's her god in a way. And she does almost suggest that in some of her poems. Like she talks about nature like it's her cathedral, like being out in nature is like her church. I will say sometimes her perspective on life seems a little bit existential and a little bit bleak sometimes, but she just sees the beauty in everything. Like the way that she sees beauty in nature, it's just, there's such an immense sense of belonging that you feel as well. Like Wild Geese is one of her most famous poems for sure, and for good reason. And I love a poem that makes me feel like I'm a part of everything, a part of the collective, a part of the world, and I feel like her poetry does that. Oh, okay, we are more than halfway through. Now it is time to get into the fiction, which I know is what a lot of you have probably been waiting for. If you're like me in the past couple of years, I've just been like a fiction girly, and I haven't delved into like any other genre. This year I was really good about kind of switching it up a little bit and reading some nonfiction, reading some poetry and some different things, but we do have a little stack here of fiction. So this is atmospheric fiction that I feel like is gonna make you uncomfortable, but maybe in like the best way possible. Maybe in a good way, if you're lucky. So first up, we have one that's gonna make a lot of people feel really uncomfortable, and that is Bear by Marian Engel. This was one of the most controversial novels to be published in Canada at the time. I think this is from the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, 1976, yep. And this is about a woman who starts a relationship with a bear in every sense of the word. I'm not going to say really anything more about that, but I just love our protagonist. Her name is Lou. She is a librarian. She lives a very kind of stuffy, mole-like existence. And then she gets this opportunity to go to like a mansion, basically, on an island. The colonel that's passed away he has this immense library, and it needs cataloging after his passing. And so she is tasked with that. And so she gets out of the library for the first time in many a year. And the strange thing that she realizes when she gets there is that in the back of the house, in a shed, is a bear, chained up. We don't know really what the story is, what the history is. I can't remember if they say like if he's supposed to be like an old circus bear or something like that. I'm not totally sure. And I think he's being taken care of mainly by an older woman who literally treats him like the pet dog, like the family dog. But while Lou is staying at the house, it is her job to go out there and like put some food in a bowl and just make sure that the bear is okay. And slowly, over the course of a couple of weeks, she gets comfortable and more comfortable with his presence. She lets him off of his chain. She lets him out. She lets him roam around, and they get pretty cozy. This was a reread for me. I've read this once before, and I don't reread books. There's too many books out there. I'm a one and done, and I move on to something else. And I've read this one now twice, so just saying. All right, next up is a little bit bleaker, and this is Hernan Diaz's In the Distance, which was a finalist for a Pulitzer. I'm not really sure why it didn't win. This will be, mark my words, a Scorsese film one day. It is probably the most atmospheric book that I've ever read. Essentially, it follows a man named Hawken. At the very beginning, so I'm not spoiling anything, he gets separated from his brother, I believe. They end up going on different ships because they think that they're heading towards America. Like, I think they think they're heading towards New York, and then he ends up like totally on the other side. So he gets separated for like the width of an entire country from his brother. And the whole storyline is him trying to get back. Him trying to get back to his family, back to his brother, and the story of the things that happen to him along the way, the people that he meets along the way. And it is one heck of a story. It's one of those books where the summary sounds kind of like blah, like, oh, it's just like his journey trying to get back to his brother. But because so much happens and he meets so many interesting people along the way, he has quite the transformation along the way. He is incredibly resilient. He may be one of my favorite characters of the year. Hawken is somebody you would want to have by your side in any situation. Like, I feel like he has that like protector kind of mentality. Like he reminds me of like Shrek in a way, but like less pessimistic than Shrek though. Or he reminds me a little bit of like Hodor from Game of Thrones. He's just big and he'll protect you. Like he'll give his life to protect you, you know? So I feel like that's who Hawken is. So because I feel like he has like a heart of gold, you'll follow him anywhere. And you do literally follow him anywhere. It's incredibly well written. The prose is amazing. Like I said, this is going to be a film one day, mark my words. Because it just lends itself to that so well. You can picture it in your mind like a film. There are still images that are just like seared into my brain. Definitely check trigger warnings. There might be something in here that I'm not recalling at the moment that might be kind of tough for some readers, but for the most part, I don't remember there really being anything in here that was too intense. That's just excellent all the way around. Next up for fiction was Lapthana by Otessa Moshfegh. I know people read My Year of Rest and Relaxation and it's a very polarizing book. That one is, it gets like amazing reviews and then it gets really, really crappy reviews. This one I've mainly heard mostly good things about. Well, some people also didn't really like this one, but I think it's better than My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This one is dark, but in a very atmospheric way. It's set in medieval times. We are following a little boy, Merrick. He's our main character, and basically he is trying to just survive, really. But there are some people in his life that make that a little bit complicated. So there's the midwife, Ina, who he still goes to see, and I will say, this category, I said these books might make you a little uncomfortable. Her character is going to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. The thing that I liked about this one, the thing that kind of triggers the plot to sort of start happening is there's a little switcheroo at the beginning with some characters. They get swapped. Not like a Freaky Friday kind of situation. The trajectory of their life immediately like changes and does a 180. So I really liked that about it. The characters are compelling. It's well written, like one-liners that you're like, wow. Like just the descriptions, I just loved it. Something about the medieval setting that's like it can be so dark and dreary and almost kind of spooky that just makes it almost feels like the setting is like a whole other character in the book, if that makes sense. I loved every single character, especially the governor, William. He rules with terror and he is just the biggest ever, but he's compelling for that reason. Like, some villains, they don't really seem to have anything compelling about them because they're just bad, and you're like, okay, I get it, like you're just supposed to be pure evil, whatever. William, he is like, the things that he does specifically to spite people, to kill people, to starve people, like he's just, I was almost wanting more of him. I wanted to be inside of his mind to try to understand why he was doing the things that he was doing. And I feel like having a really compelling, not just a really compelling narrator and like our protagonist, but an antagonist as well. Loved the dichotomy between those two. All right, two more for the fiction category. We have Diary of an Oxygen Thief. I feel like this one is famous enough. I don't really need to say too much. There's something about it, I think, because the narrator is just so, how do you even begin to describe somebody like him? It's so brutally honest. He's the type of person who, like, his intrusive thoughts, He won't say them out loud necessarily. He'll be manipulative and just try to get what he wants. But his intrusive thoughts are like, they lead his life. Like that is how he lives his life. Secretly, he is very manipulative. On the outside, you would never know, which I feel like is just like the most dangerous type of person, is like the person who seems like they're like a nice guy on the outside, but secretly they're manipulating you. And because we get to hear all of those intrusive thoughts, it's hilarious. It takes me a lot to laugh out loud at a book. Like he's very inviting the reader to psychoanalyze him, which I think is so much fun because we do that as readers anyway. He gives you his thoughts and then he's like, yeah, whatever. Go ahead and judge me. Do with that what you will. I'm not sure. I don't know my own trauma. I don't know where that comes from. But here it is, all laid out for you. Definitely check the trigger warnings. Some people are going to be very offended, I'm sure, by the things that are in those books. Adult content, for sure. And then the final one for fiction doesn't even really feel so much like fiction because the author experienced so much of this himself, and I think was using a lot of that as inspiration for this book. But it is a fiction book, and it is called Silence is My Mother Tongue by Suleiman Adonia. I always struggle with his name. So he spent much of his early life, much of his formative years in a refugee camp. And our protagonist, Saba, who's one of my favorite characters, spends her time in a refugee camp. So she's taken away. It's her brother, who's mute, and then I believe their mom as well. And again, it's one of those books that doesn't have, you feel like there's not a lot that happens, but it's so emotional and it's really intense, and so you feel like a lot happened, even though most of it takes place, like 99% of it takes place at the refugee camp. Saba is so headstrong. She's so incredible. She just wants to be with her books. Like she just wants to go to college. She just wants to go to school. She wants to study, and she can't really do that in a refugee camp. So that's a frustration that she has. She also kind of serves as like a translator or an interpreter for her brother who is mute. So she feels like she kind of has to be there for him to kind of like translate what he's feeling to other people so that he can have a somewhat normal existence. This one served for Eritrea, the country in Africa, for my Reading Around the World challenge. I will say the ending wasn't what I wanted it to be. It's also kind of told from like a story within a story kind of perspective, because we start with a trial, like Saba is on trial for something at the beginning, and then we switch back to that person's point of view at the end. And I won't say anything more than that, but it was just one of those books that the narrator in particular, she's going to stick with me, that main character. There's something really compelling about her, and I'm not going to forget about her for a while, I think. And then finally, our last category, cottagecore manga with spooky vibes. And that is The Girl from the Other Side manga series. I know, I keep mentioning it, I'm sorry, but until you guys tell me in the comments that you at least picked up the first volume, I may have to keep harping on about it. Basically, we are following two main characters. We have Shiva, this little girl who we watch grow up, and then Teacher, who is this very kind of weird creature. And they have found each other in the woods. So when we first open up, you can kind of see them sitting at the table in their little cottage, having dinner or maybe breakfast. He's kind of like a father figure. He's like taking care of her basically. And what you realize over the course of all the volumes, there are 11 total. You can see that she's much older here. But basically the story that unfolds over the course of all of these books is that we find out why Teacher looks the way that he does. We find out a lot about something that might be plaguing Shiva. We find out a lot about the curse, which is something that has plagued the land, and why Shiva and Teacher are kind of separated and isolated in this cottage out in the woods, whereas everybody else, all the other humans, are living in a castle. It gets kind of spooky, not in an actually scary way, but there are other creatures that come into play. There are transformations that happen, and you actually end up watching these people, these creatures and humans kind of transform, but not for the better. It's all the cozy vibes that you want, but it has that dark fairy tale vibe to it, so it feels more intense and more, not so like cutesy, because I don't really like cutesy things. Again, there's kind of like a dichotomy between the two of them. Like she's just an innocent child. She's so pure of heart. And then you have Creature over here who's clearly tormented by something. And so the dichotomy and that dynamic between the two of them is really, really compelling. So I'm obsessed with them. All right, guys, that is everything. Please leave me your favorite book of 2023 in the comments because I want all of those recommendations. I'd like to read a little bit more poetry in the new year, more Native American stories. I would like to read more translated work, so leave me those in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.